And I want to just say a couple things. This morning, Amy was talking about the FMLA Act, and she was talking about employees and their consideration of employers for employees. In my time of caregiving for 3 people in my family who had Alzheimer's disease, which was 18 years, I had to use the FMLA, worked out perfectly. And I have to tell you just a little comment that I think you should know about our president. I work as a vice president, and it was during when my dad was in hospice. And I'm an only child, and so what I was doing is taking care of him and trying to get there and trying to get back, et cetera, et cetera. And I told Father Schlegel at one of my meetings with him, I said, Father, I am getting my work done, but you're going to see me now, and then you won't see me. I'll be in and out. And he said to me, Pat, you are a daughter, you're a spouse, and you're an employee. You take care of all 3 as you need to. Boy, was that empowering. I can't tell you how important that was, because he wasn't looking in my office and saying, gee, she's here or she isn't here. I did get my work done, but I did it at different times of the day when I needed to get it done. So in the context of what you heard this morning, I need to tell you I've been at Creighton so long because I believe in the mission, and I believe, 85 to 95% of the time we do it pretty well. I don't agree with all our decisions, and neither do you. But at least I think we're on target. And if you can be on target with an organization and you feel like, hey, we're moving in the right direction, well then I think we're pretty lucky. So that's my side comments over there. First of all, I want to thank the ADA, Creighton ADA Committee for the invitation. Lennis and Wade wanted to come up and see me one day, and I said, okay, fine. And so they said we were having the committee, and would you do anything about caregiving? Let's make it a little bit more personal. And I said, yeah, I think I can. And I said, but can I bring others with me? That's one of the things I always want to tell you, is I'm only a caregiver. Now, I should not say that. You know, that's wrong. I should say I am a caregiver, but I'm an employee, I'm a spouse, I'm et cetera, as you are. I want to thank Bevan Phillips. She's over at the table along with Scott Pfeiffer. Those 2 are really going to be the meat of the whole presentation that we have today. I decided that when they asked me, I could speak about a caregiver to my husband who has disabilities. He does not have Alzheimer's, but the biggest part of my caregiving has been with the 18 years with the 3 people in my family who did have Alzheimer's disease. And so what we've done is, I needed help then too. And at the back, Connie Kudlacek. Connie, would you just put your hand up there? She's the founding director of the chapter, Midlands chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, and she's with Rosalie Shepard from the Midlands chapter. And what happened with me in 1986, my mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease by Dr. Virginia Aguila, a doctor at Creighton. And I stood in the hallway and I said, oh my God, now what am I supposed to do? And started crying. And she said to me, we will do the best we can. That was 1986, so think about, a number of years ago, over 20 years ago. There wasn't much out about Alzheimer's at that time. Now it's everywhere. But I don't like the messages that come out about Alzheimer's disease. So I struggled with it because there was kind of a tendency, you wanted to be able to do something, not look at all of the losses. So that's part of the presentation today, and I'm setting the stage for both Scott and Bevan. I'm going to give you small, intimate comments about caregiving. Bevan is going to go ahead and enlarge it about home access resources. And then Scott is going to go ahead and give you what's happening around the United States. I got Bevan's name from the local Alzheimer's chapter. Scott lives across the street from us, and he's been sharing with me the work that he does as an RDG architect. So I'll tell you a little bit more as we go forward. I want to thank Connie for coming. Our books, we have 2 books. One is this one, the first one, Alzheimer's Disease, a handbook for caregivers, family, and friends. And part of that book is also Dr. Roger Brumbach, and he is director of the pathology department at Creighton, and then other caregivers. And our thought was we wanted to talk about the dignity within persons. So you have to know the stance that we're coming from. I don't know how many of you have heard the quotation by Saint Irenaeus, but the quotation is, "The glory of God is man and woman fully alive." Fully alive. Have any of you ever heard that before? Well, actually, we teach it all the time. That's the atmosphere in which we live and work here at Creighton. Students come, we're here, we're a little town of about 10,000, and everything that we do is trying to make us fully alive. We want to move up in our careers. We want to do the best teaching. We want the students to be people, men and women for others, and excellent leaders in their careers and professions. Well, when I started teaching way back when, the point, the glory of God, men and women fully alive, was the focus. What do I do with these students to help them be fully alive? Everyone has potential. What I do is I move that down into my caregiving efforts. Now, Connie and I thought this would be kind of a good visual representation, but we're going to see if this works. You know, all of us wear a lot of hats, okay? So here's my employee hat, okay? All right, you all have that hat. The next one is my spouse hat, okay? Put that on here. Okay. Now you also have, pardon me, it's not quite right, you also have sibling hats and mom hats and dad hats and grandpa hats and grandma hats. And now the one that I'm going to add to the top is going to be the caregiving hat. Well, you know what happens? It sometimes gets to be too much and you need help, and the caregiving hat is just out of whack. With that visual, I want to ask you, how many of you have had Alzheimer's in your family? Okay, how many of you are primary caregivers to people in your family? Okay, you know what I mean when I say the caregiving hat. I told you that my mom got the diagnosis in 1986 from Dr. Aguila, and it was like, when I look at caregiving, it was like we walked into the office of the doctor and I only had 5 hats, and we walked out of the doctor's office and I had 6. I had just been given another hat of caregiving, but I wasn't prepared. First thing I do is I go to the Alzheimer's Association. Connie is there and she saves me a number of times. What I want to do is have you look at some of the handouts that are in your packet, and they're toward the back. And would you go please to the handout that says Alzheimer's Fact Sheet? This is from Home Instead. That's already been discussed. Under who is impacted by Alzheimer's disease, it says number 6. Have we all got it? Okay. It says an estimated 24 million people in the world have dementia, a figure that is projected to rise to 81 million by 2040. Quickly compute in your mind, how old will you be then? I know I'll be 103. I'm not kidding. We're going to live that long. So what we're telling you today about caregiving, we're telling you about yourself. We're talking about the transitions that are going to occur during our life that goes from being healthy, maybe, not, we're all frail in some way, but think about 2040 and how old you'll be. Who provides Alzheimer's care? Let me go to that one. A typical Alzheimer's family caregiver is a woman 48 years old. I was 49 when I started. Married, yes. Employed, yes. With at least some college education, yes. And no children in the home, yes. Boy, look at that profile. Most Alzheimer's caregivers, 87% of them are helping relatives. Okay, I was a secondary caregiver to an aunt. And then it says 57% of caregivers helping their mothers and fathers or whatever. They say mothers because, you know, women live a little bit longer. Then it gives other statistics. More than half of Alzheimer's caregivers, 53%, are primary, and you got some of those statistics from Amy. Who needs help? Look at that one. 1 of 5 Alzheimer's caregivers is in just fair to poor health, and 18% report caregiving has made their life and health worse. Now, folks, this is where I have to argue. I don't say that that's not true. It can be. But go back to the original quote that I gave you, which was, "The glory of God is man and woman fully alive." In my struggle for 18 years, it was like, I can't stand the loss. Everything you see. Have you seen the movies where, and it's true, but there's another side, and the other side is nurture what remains. Next, I want you to go to the handout that says, Alzheimer's disease, nurture what remains. Everybody have one? Okay. This is a different way to look at Alzheimer's. In our 2 books that have been written with Dr. Brumbach, both of them, he's the physician. Inside, I want to show you what we decided was the best thing we could tell caregivers of persons with a dementia or Alzheimer's disease. If you look inside, the first part is a diagram of the brain, and it's fully intact before the disease. And you look over at the side, and it says the brain drawing illustrates, so on and so forth. Now realize, and then it says you can do all these things, but none of us can do all those things perfectly. You go to the early to mild stage, which is about a 3 to 5 year period. For me, caregiving was not 8 years, it was 18. It's a long time to try to keep the spirit up and say, let's keep going. Over here, in our books, the brain is in the first book, and the diagram of the functions of the brain are in the second one, and so we use this when we make presentations. This shows the disease that does go across the brain, but when Dr. Brumbach talks, he says, even in the early mild stage, yes, there's frailty, but look at how much remains. Look over at the functions, the early memory loss, et cetera, yeah. And it gradually, but 3 to 5 years, you're not going to see it right away. You just adapt. Go down to this one. This is the moderate stage. Down here is where my dad had to give up driving because he had an accident and totaled the car. Didn't hurt anybody, hurt himself. He hit a car and he hit a house. And the house was more damaged than the car. But look what still remains. You know what he did here? Here he put his foot on the gas rather than the brake. This is the time when people usually have a little difficulty of being able to go ahead and synchronize the sight and the mind and the feet and the neurons that tell us what to do. Over here, we have the severe stage. But look at the part that still remains. Notice, senses, memory, etc. When I was going through the disease, Connie Kudlacek was my absolute friend and co-author. Connie, for over 20 years, heard stories upon stories about people who were caregivers for a long period of time and the adjustments and the transitions that you have to make. And this is where I'm going to just briefly talk about the transitions. Take that for yourself and talk about this if you happen to have somebody with a dementia in your family. What remains? What can we still do? Toward the end, my dad had to go to hospice, but this is what happened. It's the transitions, and here's where I'm leading right into both Bevan and Scott. My own little world and situation was helped by the chapter and others, Dr. Broombach, etc. Because we kept thinking about what can I still do, what can I still do? When my dad had to leave home, that was a terrible transition. We had done everything at the house that we could. We had handlebars for him to be able to do, pull himself into the house and so on and so forth. But then when he couldn't remember, he went to our Creighton hospital, and the occupational therapist said he can't go home. And I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do now? We had somebody coming in every day, we had the visiting nurses, we had people crushing his pills, et cetera, caregivers, because he couldn't remember to put his hands on the chair, arms, to sit down. He just would fall backwards. He'd get it for a while, but not enough. Have to make a transition. Transition to assisted living. There for a couple years. Transition to hospital again. Transition back to Bickford Cottage. Transition to hospital. Transition to long-term care in an Alzheimer's unit with 2 people, which bothered me terribly. But he had a window. That's the only thing he cared about, is to be able to look out that window. Transition to hospice. I don't know if you know much about the Josie Harper hospice care. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. And they taught me all along of what I could do. Remember, we're back to nurture what remains. When Dad couldn't swallow anymore, I always brought him malts. And they taught me how to feed him a malt through a syringe, so that I had pleasure and he had pleasure. On your little chart, it shows the senses, everything. So the caregiver is reaching out and looking for ways to try to help handle the situation. So the caregiver is nurtured as well as the person who has the disease. When you look at the important things, when in all my caregiving, I want to go back. The important things are always, for me anyway, stimulation, socialization, and safety. I could go into more stories, but I can do that at another time if you want me to do that for you. I have in your folders, though, 2 handouts, Staying Safe and Safety at Home for a person with dementia, so you can read those on your own. Everything that we do in our caregiving is to nurture what remains, to stimulate, to help socialize, and to help bring safety, so that all persons can continue to be men and women who are fully alive throughout their life to the best extent that we can be. The last slide that I want to show you is, right now, my work is going to be transitioning. I'm going to stay with Creighton, but I will not, I've asked not to have vice presidential duties after June 30. I will be here for another year at 20 hours a week, but I'll be working with both Drs. Sullivan and Drs. Dickel on the Creighton study of violence across the lifespan. And I'm working especially on mistreatment of elder persons who at home, in assisted living, etc. Anything that you know about mistreatment about elder persons is pretty small unless you're really trying to keep up with it. that data is 30 years behind what we know about child abuse, and you know how much violence there is in our society. For me, I say, okay, fully alive, nurture what remains. This is in our book on page 19, the first book, A Patient's Bill of Rights. Every person diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or a related disorder deserves the following, and this is in your book, so I don't have to go through every one. To be informed of the diagnosis, to be treated as an adult, to have appropriate ongoing medical care, to be productive in work and play as long as possible. Now here's where I have to say, I think that both Bev Ann and Scott will move to this. When you look at our long-term care and you look at assisted living even, some of the facilities are wonderful. Some could be more safe. They'll tell you how to make things safe. But if you notice, at least in my experience, most of the people are treated as a group. We're all going to play bingo, and we're all going to have exercise, and we're all going to have, groups. Not the individual care of the person, individual. So I'm working on another book with two occupational therapists here at Creighton, Drs. Helene Lohman and Andrea Tinnis, on what to do to be able to help stimulate the body and the mind and everything as you move forward with arthritis and all the disabilities that we have. We can still stimulate. There's another book that I am reading, and it's called The Mature Mind by Dr. Jean Callone. That book tells us that our brains are constantly growing and developing and making new connections. I asked Dr. Brumbach, could that be, even with Alzheimer's? He said, sure. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you, that the brain will adapt and make new connections. Do you know that we usually say people are wise when they get old? And Dr. Jean Callone says, yes, but it's because the brain is making new connections and we see things differently. And all of the anxious part of our brain early, when we're growing up, recedes and we're making new connections. Every time, he said to me, Dr. Brumbach said, every time a person starts saying, I can't do something, I will have to adapt, we're smart. People with Alzheimer's disease are smart. Dad would make sure that he had to get to the grocery store, but he would never turn left. He just would make a big circle. And he'd get there. If you know people with Alzheimer's disease, you know very well. They know how to get out of places and they know how to get in places. They are talented. There's a lot remaining. So we have to stimulate that. Over here, I want to make sure that as I lead into both Bev Ann and to Scott, that safety, structured, predictable environment is so important, not just with people with Alzheimer's disease, is with people, all of us. And then one thing at the very bottom, to be cared for by individuals well-trained in dementia care. I have to tell you, folks, we don't have that. Isn't it strange in our culture that the children in preschool and the elder frail persons are cared for with people that maybe have $7 or $8 an hour? And they need the most sophisticated knowledge of the growth and development of what's going on in that mind and in that body. Well, we got to make some changes here. This is the model. Anything that deviates from the model can be a type of mistreatment. And the next one is, those are developed by the people who were working with Alzheimer's chapters, and then also it's taken from our work.